right, let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us in the Stupid Family Building. My name is Jennifer Wagner. I'm the Associate Director of the Cocoziello Institute of Real Estate Innovation. And thank you for being here today, braving the cold for the first of our seminar series this semester for Foundations for the Future seminar series. And it is really a privilege to have Michael Eliason here with us today. Michael was the founder of the Seattle-based Larch Lab, part architecture and urbanism studio, part think and do tank focused on research and policy. And Michael began an exciting new role just recently as the Director of Design and Policy at Seattle Social Housing, a public development authority in Seattle. He will help oversee building standards and establishing a policy framework intended to deliver better, more sustainable, and more livable buildings with a more diverse unit mix. Michael is an award-winning architect with professional experience in both the United States and Germany, specializing in mass timber, social housing, urban co-housing, passive house, thank you, buildings. And over the years, he's helped usher several legislative efforts on point access blocks across the United States. And he's a founding board member of the Seattle's Passive House, social house developer. He's the author of the book, Building for People, Designing Livable, Climate-Friendly, Affordable Neighborhoods. And if you've not yet had an opportunity to do so, I do encourage you to pick up a copy of that book and read it. In that book, he advocates for planning neighborhoods where public health, affordable housing, climate adaptation, and high quality of life are prioritized. I'm grateful for Michael being here. When I was trying to put this seminar series together, he absolutely was the first one that came to mind, the first one that got the invite, and thankfully he accepted. So please join me in welcoming our speaker.
All right, can everybody hear me? It's been a long day of talking. If you can't, just like wave your hands and we'll go. So I'm an architect. I'm now, I guess, a developer. I'm really interested in this idea of how we build better homes and neighborhoods. Spend a lot of time doing research, writing, traveling, working abroad. The way we build housing in cities is vastly different than other places, and there are all these funny knock-on effects related to it. 2003, 2004, I went to Virginia Tech. My fourth year, they kick everyone out of the university for architecture. You can work for credit, you can study. There's a travel abroad program. I ended up working for a firm for a year in Freiburg, Germany. This picture is a modern update of what life was like there. Huge pedestrian zone, very bike friendly, tram friendly. At the time, passive house, mass timber, Baugruppen, all of these things that I kind of talk about during my book were foundational to my time here in Freiburg, which was over 20 years ago. Also, as an architect, I'm very cognizant of the fact that we have a massive and growing affordable housing crisis in the US. We're not really addressing it at the scale needed. On top of that, we also have the social isolation crisis. It was bad before COVID. Post-COVID, I would argue it's even worse. The quality of our third places is going down and down. Social isolation is associated with a number of public health effects as well that we want to kind of avoid. So it's something, my wife also works in public health, so it's something that I think about. Carbon emissions, right? We should be driving down carbon emissions. We're still headed in the wrong direction. EV sales have kind of leveled off here. They're a majority of, I'm not even a huge fan of EVs, but they're a huge percentage of the cars sold in like Asia now, or at least China, Europe. And so we're not really going in the direction that we need to. And the climate crisis is already here, right? Climate change is now. This was taken a couple of years ago. This was at the height of the pandemic. We got a heat dome, 1,600 people between Oregon and British Columbia succumbed to the effects of that heat. And then a few weeks later, this was what our view looked like. It's really wonderful. We used to never get these, and now we have annual smoke season, sometimes twice a year. I know you guys here on the East Coast are starting to get it as well. So in thinking about climate adaptation, flooding, all of these things that we should be thinking about, we really aren't doing anything to address it, especially at the scale that's necessary. One fundamental aspect that really confuses me is that our buildings were designed for a climate that no longer exists. So our energy codes are based on historic data from the past. Moving forward, our peaks get peakier, our averages get funky. And so if you're building a building today for climate data that's 20 years old, you're already beyond or behind where you should be. This is a really fun little map showing that, let's see, laser pointers is working. All right, in 2060, worst case scenario, you guys are gonna have the similar climate to northern Arkansas. So hotter, more humid, that'll have some effects on wind construction and other things related to that. Also, the way that we plan cities is wildly different than other places. In Seattle, we focus all of our density, all of our affordable housing, literally on truck routes. I like to joke that we don't have transit-oriented density, we have truck-oriented density. And so these are the kinds of roads where we think we should put affordable housing and people who can't afford the $1 million homes off of those streets. My kid has to cross this road twice a day to go to school. Luckily, there's a bridge. It's not the safest. But like, it fascinates me that this pattern of development is something that you can observe from space. Right? You go look at like Berlin, Munich, Tokyo from outer space, right? You don't see these striations, right? This is the multifamily area. This is single family area, right? So the differentiation is noticeable. This guy. Oh, I think he's got out of order. The way that I think that we should be approaching this is to have Passive House as our mandate for everything, fresh, filtered air 24/7. This is a clean, up top, this is a clean filter in the Passive House building. The one down below, that is 3 weeks old. This is a person who lives a block from the highway. And so he's having to change his Passive House filter fairly regularly. If he wasn't, then he would be breathing those particles, right? So the way that we build, how we build, where we build, all of this stuff really matters. Again, Passive House, focus on air tightness, operational carbon reductions become even more normalized, you use less energy. So those things are all great. But we're thinking about like redeveloping areas, redeveloping cities, urban morphology, how cities change over time. We put a new light rail station in Seattle here. Lots of new big multifamily buildings, kind of similar to some of the ones going up downtown. You can see these are big blocky buildings. There's no courtyard. There are no pedestrian streets. There's one daycare facility. There's no park. There's little affordable housing. Right? When we think about how places change over time, we're not really being intentional in how we plan. And even at the missing middle scale, let's say we have a single family neighborhood and we start allowing missing middle, but we allow a broad variety of types. You know, townhomes behind townhomes, small apartment buildings, double duplex. This whole area in the middle, when it was single family houses, was trees. And now we've allowed more density, but all of the trees are gone, right? And so thinking about how places change, how do we adapt to climate? How do we prioritize nature isn't really gonna work. This is kind of like the worst case scenario that we're seeing in Seattle, right? Auto core, no space for nature.
No space for nature, townhomes everywhere. They're not accessible. They're not affordable. If you have kids, there's really no place for them to play here. And it's a fundamentally different way of living in a city compared to my experience growing up as a military brat living abroad. This is in, I believe, Darmstadt, Germany. These are all small apartment buildings. Some of them are row houses, but they're pushed to the street. They're touching, right? There's no thermal heat loss side to side. There's less construction costs related to that as well. And then because they regulate the depth of the building, ample space for trees. Ample space for trees on either side of the building. You've got units on either side, right? So it's a fundamentally different way of dealing with density and climate and inducing places that I think are much more resilient. And this pattern, when you go into like mid-rise buildings, right, it still persists. These are all 5, 6, 7-story buildings, inhabited attics. Again, they delineate where the building can go, leaving open space for community, trees, nature, storage, what have you. And so I think we're at this moment right now in the US. It's not just Seattle. I could go to SEPTA. I could go to DC metro area. Almost all of our transit is highway adjacent, right? And that cuts off a huge portion of where it's actually walkable from a public health standpoint. It's like the worst place that you could build outside of like a smelter, right? And so it prevents us from building these places that have adequate density, that are walkable, that are livable, and have a high quality of life. This is actually outside of Philly. This is SEPTA. Again, big building, small courtyard. No, where are the trees? Where's the open space? Right? These are all double loaded corridors. So we'll talk about that here in a second. Anyone familiar with the term Texas donut? Yeah, so Texas donut is you have a parking garage and then you build apartments around it. So these people all have a corridor here and then only one aspect of looking out to the units over here. Fascinating, little privacy and something like that. Again, like this pattern of development that was ingrained in my brain, both in school and working and living abroad, is radically different from this. Finding space for community, finding space for nature, for trees. These all look like one building, but when you go to the three-dimensional, this isn't one building, this is a building, this is another building, this is another building, right? So you have this really elegant, fine-grained nature to the way the city developed. And this, we'll develop a block at a time. These all were built in like the same 10-year period as well, right? So this is rapid development that was occurring, but the development didn't look like this. This building is not in State College, but I have a feeling based on the view of the look on some of your faces, you would see this building in State College. This building doesn't really exist outside of the US. Canada does a lot of the same things as well. From an urban planning standpoint, the cities will mandate, we'll change the facade. We don't want it to look like one big bulky building. We'll mandate multiple materials because, again, we don't want it to look like a big building. Most of the units in these buildings are going to be studios and one-bedrooms. It's a massive development. You often have to assemble multiple parcels, which increases costs and timelines for projects. For you architects in the room, like there's no relief on these facades, right? The windows are flush with the exterior and it just looks really banal. And from a maintenance standpoint, it's really terrible too. Right? This is Germany. This is Mannheim. This is a relatively new development. These buildings all look different because they are. This is a Baugruppe, urban co-housing project. This is market rate worker housing. This is student housing, right? So there's this intensity and density that's happening at the block level that we just didn't see with our development in the US. And so the thesis of my book and my professional career for the last, I guess, 5 years now has been the way that we design and plan buildings is fundamentally different from the world. And until we start to address that, we're not going to be able to build better places. But I think fundamentally we have to be rethinking how we build places and housing and cities so that we do have social connectivity. So climate adaptation is prioritized, and so is public health. Really quick primer, there are basically 3 ways of accessing your home in a big multifamily building. There's a double loaded corridor. This is the most common in the US, unheard of in Europe, except for maybe worker housing or student housing or senior housing. This is like living in a hotel. You've got lots of units on one side of the hallway. You have maybe a window here. If you're lucky on the corner, you get multiple exposures. It's not a great way to live compared to some of the other options. There's also the single loaded corridor where you have just an exterior corridor. This can be open to the environment, maybe in a place like State College, especially today. Not such a great idea. You could have that either non-conditioned or conditioned internally, can provide sound protection and other things. But you do have the opportunity to get some cross ventilation if it's open. You do get the opportunity for daylight on multiple sides. But the point access block, the single stair building, is the workforce of urban housing the world over. The idea is you have one core with an elevator and a handful of units around it. And if you want to make larger development, well, you just start ganging them together. So one way to think about this is that our codes induce these massively thick buildings, right? Small units, like I said, studios, one bedrooms. It's a relatively decent efficiency on the floor plate, and our codes mandate it. Anytime you're more than 3 stories or 4 units per floor, with a couple of exceptions, you have to have 2 stairs, so stair 1, stair 2, elevator, and a corridor connecting all of it. And so you get these big, massive buildings with thick floor plates and deep, deep, dark units. Single loaded corridor, you have a much thinner building, right? You have opportunity for daylight on multiple sides, but it's not very efficient. And so you don't see it in the US for that reason, but also I think there are a number of cultural reasons I think we don't see these in the US. In the West Coast, they're affiliated with like really cheap apartments and motels, which I could see. But if you go to Switzerland, they build like 10-story co-ops that are built like this. And like this the most elegant building you've ever seen. And then the point access block, which is also incredibly thin, but that thinness allows space for green. You get units that can cross ventilate. You can put bedrooms on the quiet side of the street. So if this is a loud street over here, the bedrooms can be quiet. The US is really an anomaly in this, right? So yellow is 3 stories, and the green dots were 6. This map is now outdated. There are some 22 states and jurisdictions that are working on single stair legislation. Canada was at 2 stories. Their government is working to increase that to 6. You go to Europe and almost everyone but the Netherlands allow 6-story single stair buildings. Most of them allow much taller. So there's this aspect of like regulation, right? So how do regulations affect the way we build? Well, 100 years ago, the Seattle Building Code was, relatively normal. And this also included our kind of urban planning documents, what you could build and where. The building code today is thousands and thousands of pages. The things that they reference are also thousands and thousands of pages, standards, norms, all of that fun stuff. And so you basically have to be familiar to develop a building, right? What is the net effect of this? Our building codes have gotten increasingly more stringent over time. You went from majority small buildings, right? 29 units or less, became harder and harder and more difficult to finance and build. So today we have almost no small buildings. 20 years ago, buildings of 50 units or more were actually quite rare. Now they're quite common. I would say this is the most common form of development on the West Coast right now. And so we're inducing these larger and larger buildings, which are also more expensive, entails more risk. We also get to do fun stuff. Does anyone know what you would call this condition right here? No? Okay. This is a dead-end corridor, 100% legal in any city in the US. Basically, you can go up to 50 feet from the stair. So all of these units only have one means of egress. If there's a fire here, they're hosed, right? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, so already that's a worse condition than the single stair. But like this is a new building, whole block, really, really tiny courtyard. It's like living in a fishbowl. You've got units here, and all you can see are units here. If you're not on the top floor, you really don't have any sky view. These are incredibly dark units. Single stair allows us to get a similar number of bedrooms in less space. So this is cost savings. This is carbon savings. It allows us to get more family-sized units. 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom that you don't see in typical construction. This is a study we did for a development in Seattle, looking at kind of the typical means of development. So corridor, 2 stairs, mostly studios around it, larger 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom at the corner, to something that's more family oriented, 2, 3-bedroom units on each floor, single stair, just 2 units on either side. This is a fundamentally common pattern of development, literally the world over, but just not in the US. All of the buildings, it allows for cross ventilation. It allows for more daylight than you would see in traditional development. The kitchen, living, dining areas are also oriented parallel to the facade. They're not perpendicular. So if you look at a lot of US buildings, the kitchen would be way up here and there'd be no daylight. You can get the bedrooms on the quiet side of the street. This issue of like how we live in apartments, I think, is going to become more and more critical. We're not really doing much on affordable housing. We need to build more housing. What kind of housing are we going to build? We're going to build these deep, dark 2-bedroom units that we kind of have to fill up with space, right? These buildings are so deep to get those bedrooms. We just kind of have to fill more stuff in. Another bedroom, another bathroom, big storage closets, places that people might not need, right? Is the same amount of space in kind of a traditional European or maybe South American, Central American project, you get a 3-bedroom unit with a radically different quality of life. It also allows for something that you don't see in most traditional development because of this limitation on the number of units per stair. I might not have mentioned that. You're limited to 4 units per stair per floor, right? So in order to maximize your buildable area, right, you're going to kind of squeeze in as much as you can on the construction side. So all of a sudden you've got 4-bedroom apartment buildings, incredibly common in other countries. I can't remember the last time I saw a 4-bedroom apartment in the US that wasn't like a luxury penthouse. And so at a larger scale, you can get the same thing. You start putting together multiple, these yellow guys here are the vertical circulation, the stair and elevators, right? So all of these units, 3, 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom on the reentry corner, right? All of these units have daylight on opposite sides. They're large units. They're quite livable. offering a radical departure from the way we develop in the US. I started tweeting about this basically 8 years ago, turned that into a job, and then started working on policy. Folks kind of disconnected all over the country and other places as well. Washington was the first place to pass a single stair bill in 2023. It's just a study bill. Basically, we are allowed to do 6-story single stair buildings in Seattle. And we said, okay, let's do that in the rest of Washington. Originally, legislators were like, oh, okay, let's do that. And then the fire department was like, no, we don't like that approach. And so there's been this negotiated path to doing 6-story buildings in most of Washington when there's adequate fire access, when there's adequate water flow. But this idea of like our regulations are not robust in developing or allowing us to develop the kinds of places that we want to do, so we should address it, was not common. Like we've been addressing the zoning thing for, I don't know, 100 years, basically since the beginning of zoning. But this issue of like how our building codes actually prevent the kinds of things we want was really relatively new. It's now there's like this new focus of advocacy around making the building codes less ridiculous. Right, so this is what, a kitchen, living, dining area in a 2-bedroom unit in Seattle looks like right now. Like I said, long, deep space, dark over here, one window if you're lucky. This is similar to the 3-bedroom place we lived in Germany, where we had daylight on 3 sides. This one's ground oriented, but even if it wasn't, there'd be a balcony here, abundant daylight, much different way of thinking about inhabiting. The Swiss are probably I would say the preeminent builders of livable housing the world over. This is a cooperative, right? So this is their version of affordable housing. And this is just ridiculous that this is affordable housing that's nicer than any luxury housing I think I've ever seen. And like going forward, we have 3-bedroom windowless units. So 1, 2, 3 bedrooms in Seattle under development right now. None of these bedrooms have windows. There's one tiny window here onto a little courtyard, right? This makes the tenements in New York actually look quite livable. I think the windowless bedroom issue is going to go away. There's work at the IBC to prevent that from happening. But again, this is like the developers reacting to our restrictive code by coming up with something that's technically legal, but from a livability standpoint is pretty amazing. You can take that concept to elevators, right? The cost of an elevator in Switzerland is 3 to 5 times less than it is in the US. My buddy Stephen Smith at the Penn building in North America put out a really, really wonderful report on this. It was published in the New York Times. This is due to a number of issues: regulation, labor, lack of competition. The US and Canada have a different certification for elevators than the rest of the world, right? So kind of looking back at the single stair map, right? There's this anomaly here where our regulations are inducing things that are much more expensive. And so what does that mean? You're not going to see them in more apartments. There are more accessible apartments in Greece, Spain, and Italy, which are all countries that have a much lower GDP than there are in the US and Canada. This is ridiculous. We can take this to the plumbing code. So a recent iteration of the plumbing code requires more ventilation stacks. At this point, this increases costs. It increases embodied carbon of materials, right? And so like with a small change that was mandated by the body that oversees the plumbing code, right? They've increased the cost of plumbing in the US. There are ways that we could mitigate this. We could do something like a sanitary stack, which is where you just kind of have one stack for venting all of your plumbing that everything goes to, right? It's less redundant. There are cost savings. There are energy efficiency savings in this as well. Works really, really well with single stair, but not all jurisdictions allow this. Some jurisdictions you have to fight to do this. One of the things I love about, like, you start pulling together all of these separate pieces. You've got single stair, you've got the plumbing issue, right? You can develop these livable, does anyone know what a triple decker is? So triple decker is like the common form of development, kind of outside of Boston. 3 units stacked on top of each other, 1 stair. You get a radical amount of density for the rest of the US, and it's relatively livable. This is like the single stair version, or the Swiss version of that, I think it's 6 floors instead of 3. All of their plumbing is centered on this one core, right? And all of it drops to here. It's incredibly efficient. You're saving a ton of money, and then you're opening up all of your exterior for windows and views. Take this idea of like redundancy and how we build buildings. So we have these deep floor plates. We have to fill them with stuff. Well, that means more doors, right? More gypsum, more wall. It's more paint. It's more costs. Similar sized units. The livability on this, daylight on 3 sides, cross ventilation. You don't have to walk through the kitchen or living area to get to the other bedrooms or the bathrooms, right? Very different than like you would see in the US context. But it uses half of the amount of wall area. It has half of the number of doors, right? So there are cost effects related to that. Just kind of a quick diagram showing, okay, this is the amount of wall and also more glazing, right? There's twice as much glazing in the Swiss project as there is in the US one. As we start to think about how we zone buildings, embodied carbon is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. Our zoning codes induce these really, really complex building shapes. This is from the city of Toronto, and my buddies up at Half Studio. They found that just simplifying the building form, right? Not even changing the zoning requirements, just allowing something that was similar. You got massive reduction in embodied carbon with also saving costs. You have less concrete in the transfer beams. You've got less concrete in the foundation, right? So it's just a different way of thinking about building. Simplicity is key, right? Okay, how do we take these ideas and start thinking about, okay, getting outside of just the house or the building scale? How do we look at neighborhoods, right? The way that we plan neighborhoods in the US, fundamentally different than the rest of the world. 120 years ago, Seattle did not have a zoning code. I would say that was like the heyday of Seattle's kind of livable, walkable neighborhoods that we're still trying to reproduce today. Our first zoning code in 1923 was only 25 pages, much more liberal than today's. And today we've got a 1,440 page zoning code, which also references design guides and other documents, which again are thousands of pages, right? So again, you have to be a lawyer to plan these buildings. It makes no sense. The city of Basel, their zoning code is so dumb, so simplistic that you can summarize the entire thing on one page. This is basically the number of stories, if it's open or closed. So if it has a requirement for buildings on some sides, or if it's open on all 4 sides, the FAR, how high your building can be, what your wall height has to be, and all of those things. But it's just, it fascinates me that like your zoning code is so easy that you could just kind of come together and put something like this. If I were to try to do this in the US, like I would not be able to do it, right? What's the, does not compute. And so these issues of building code and zoning code are actually really critical to how we think about development. So right now, when we're redeveloping areas, let's say we've got a street with 6 or 7 different businesses on it, maybe a house or 2. Our building codes really introduce these new buildings, these big, massive buildings, double-loaded corridors. Again, we'll try to play fun games to make them not look so big, but they are so big. You know, the rest of the world, go to Tokyo, go to Mexico City, Buenos Aires, like those individual lots could just get redeveloped. And so you have this much more fine-grained, piecemeal kind of growth over time. The effects of our double-loaded corridors, our thick buildings, means we have less privacy. These units are closer together. There's less space for community. There's less space for airflow. There's less space for nature and all of those things. When we start doing point access blocks and thinner buildings, we get pretty much the same level of density, but on much less floor area. And then also we could be thinking about how do we accelerate some of this fine-grained development where maybe some areas need more height, right? This is like an actual block you would see in the Netherlands, where it's like 8-story building, 5-story, 6-story, 5-story, 4-story, and a couple of townhomes, right? I could pull that out of several different projects, but like, so you get a wide variety of building types here, a wide variety of tenures. Again, you could have co-housing next to co-op. Maybe this is social housing, this is senior housing. Right at that block level, you're getting just this radical granularity. And in the US, we just kind of get these, what did my friend call them? Bread loaf buildings, right? And I think that radical diversity at that block level is imperative. Not only do we get like fine-grained nature, regional spaces, or community-oriented spaces, but you're connected. You're closer in. You're dealing with each other on a regular basis. And our building codes, our zoning codes currently don't really allow for that level of mixing. We also need to be thinking about how we adapt to climate change. City of Basel has undertaken a number of studies looking at how different neighborhoods will warm at night on kind of different climate scenarios. So, this is the train station. There's a lot of paved space. That's definitely going to be the hottest. The city park is obviously the coolest. But they have these Zeilenbauten are like linear slab buildings, right? These linear slab buildings are like this really wonderful combination of density and open space. And it turns out that it's pretty much the same temperature as the park, but a density that's probably comparable to the perimeter block area up here, or even the central city, which has almost no green space in it whatsoever. In Freiburg, where I lived, they've kind of perfected this idea of building new districts that are, I would say, oriented around quality of life. This is, sorry, my brain is not working right now. This is Rieselfeld. This was in development when we lived there. This is a highway. There's a major truck route here. All of this green over here, this is a noise map, right? So you see the loud road, loud road. They've sculpted the topography between the two to deflect noise. And then all of these buildings along the edge here are commercial, and they're all oriented to block the noise even further. And so what you get is all of this green is under 35 decibels at night, right? So this is like living in a single family neighborhood, probably even a rural area here in State College. But these are 3, 4, 5, even 6-story multifamily buildings. They're also kind of pulled apart, right? So you have ample green space, space for trees. It's not perfect, but it's a radical departure from like any TOD you would see here in the US. I think that some places do go a little bit too nuts. This is the Ackermann Bogen in Munich. This is all residential. There's like a daycare here. There's a commercial component next to it. The idea is that if you live here, you can kind of walk around without interacting with any cars. I have 2 kids. I think this is wonderful. But again, it's these thin buildings that allow for the open space that really takes initiative here. Another component of how districts are done in Europe is the urban planning competitions, which lead to then design competitions for individual buildings. I, personally, I'm a bigger fan of this. What you see is what you get. You'll have a jury of professionals who know exactly what mobility issues are or urban planning issues are. There'll be a series of criteria that projects are mandated to meet, criteria that they're judged on. And so from the very beginning, and it's increasingly citizens will have a lot more input on how these districts are done. Let's say you're building in a area of warehouses that's going to become a dense district. What do the surrounding neighborhoods need? Well, we need daycare, we need a school, we need a playground, we need a swimming pool, right? They'll find ways to kind of insert these. But what you get out of this is from the outset, you know exactly how a district is going to change. And the way we do planning in the US, that you won't really know how that district is going to change, at least at a theoretical level, until several years into a process. And then cities often will undergo rezoning and other things that kind of negate that. These competitions also allow, I think, a rethink of urbanism. This is the Falleby in Copenhagen by Henning Larsen. It's this weird interstitial space, not quite village, not quite rural, but also not quite in the city. It's kind of a big green space. And so Henning Larsen said, okay, well, let's take the best parts of both of these and bring them together. And they've developed this new typology. There's an effort around mass timber and climate adaptation. But the idea is that you've got this district that is walkable, it's dense, there's still open space, and cars are not prioritized. So the fundamental argument I start to make is that we should be thinking about eco districts instead of TOD, and could we be thinking about them as carbon sinks? This is Sonnenwendviertel in Vienna. This massive park here is also a climate adaptation space, so flooding inundation can go in here. This is mostly social housing. There's some wonderful co-ops. There's a pedestrian spine here. They've built car parking on the edge, right, to block the noise. Fundamentally, it's a very different kind of feel or quality of life than in a typical TOD project. Massive school property here, daycare all the way up to secondary school. So if you're in a housing complex over here, your kids can walk to and from school without interacting with a single car. And it blows my mind to think about because my kids could never do that. And so like this park aspect becomes almost critical, right? The park performs double duty. It's space for community, space for nature, space for climate adaptation. This is another eco district that Vienna has done. This is Aspern-Seestadt on a former airfield. Massive park area with a lake that's part of the flooding mitigation. And then it's just surrounded by this, really walkable density. We're really, really reticent to put density off of arterials in the US. And I don't know why, and I don't understand it, but this is a district in France. This is maybe 3 or 4 streets over from the main arterial. It was quieter here than it is in the single family neighborhood we live in Seattle. I think we need to be thinking about how infrastructure can double as play space or other community spaces. This is the U-Bahn extension at Seestadt Osborn. So the lake is over here. These are some of the towers that have recently been completed. There are gym spaces underneath it, short-sighted soccer goals underneath it. When it's raining, there are ways to kind of navigate this place without getting inundated with water as well, right? And so it becomes this radical way of like dealing with, okay, we are building a new district, we have to supply it with infrastructure. How can we make that infrastructure kind of pay for itself in other ways? Similarly, Domag Park in Munich, big car-free area, a massive park in the middle, huge pit for flooding mitigation, but they make it an asset, right? This becomes a playground. I've never seen this with water. I really, really want to see this with water. In the US, we would never do this because from a liability standpoint, right? Like it's not happening. Increasingly, the heat is going to become an issue. We have no solar protection industry in the US whatsoever. It blows my mind. Working in Germany, there were like 80 different manufacturers we could contact for exterior shading. This is really good for keeping out the sun, keeping places cooler. They can also work in like storms and other things. The best we can do in Seattle is really boutique roll up blinds on the exterior, which look well. Or you could like reach out to some sailboat manufacturers and try to get some canvas similar to this project. But I think that we need to be thinking about how the heat is going to affect our buildings more and more. Mass timber, increasingly, everyone knows about mass timber, right? This idea of taking a really simple piece of or element of wood and adding a couple of other things to just make it stronger, bigger, prefabricated, and go together quicker. I think it's really, really great. I think we should be focusing on mass timber, decarbonization, circularity to a greater degree. But my big underdog for decarbonization is actually prefabricated passive house straw panels. So these are exterior wall panels. They're using them on single family. They're using them on multifamily. They're using them on commercial buildings. Basically, you put this on your building, you're soaking up a ton of carbon. And then you've got a building that's a passive house. It's not going to need much energy to heat or cool. You won't have mold issues long term. You can do really wonderful things like clay plaster over the straw. It just looks gorgeous. And so the fundamental question is, why can't our neighborhoods be more like this? This isn't an ideal. This is something radically different than we would see in the US, but I think the quality of life here is very, very different than you would find in TOD in any city in the US. And from a resident standpoint, 50% of the homes here are affordable or social housing. A lot of the market rate are co-ops or Baugrouping, which are kind of quasi affordable housing. They're kind of, I guess, middle income. And so, you've got a neighborhood of, let's say, 5,000 people and 80% of them are not wealthy. You go to any TOD project in the US, 80% of those units are not reserved for middle and working class residents. And so this is my challenge to you. I'm gonna have to read it, sorry. My challenge for you, right? You guys are a research institution. I think it's fundamental that we understand why our US codes are written by a private corporation. So the International Code Council is a private entity. It's not written by the government. You go to any other country and the government is actually authoring the codes. Is there a way to measure the effects and outcomes of our codes and regulations? I think this is what I was trying to do at Large Lab, but it's a much larger project and much more difficult. Or is there a way to adopt better codes? A lot of my colleagues will default to performance-based codes. So our building codes are so long because they're prescriptive. They say you do this, you do this, you do this. Performance-based codes allow you to pare that down, but there are metrics you have to hit. But the cost of labor in the US on the design side is so much more than other countries that it's really, really difficult to do performance-based codes. You're not going to find developers of small buildings who want to do that because it just adds additional cost and effort. But I think we need to find a way to adopt better codes. I hate to pick on Germany because, like I said, that's my frame of reference. I know too much about it. They're undertaking policy around, they're calling it the building class E for experimental. What can you strip out of a building so that you prioritize life safety and habitability to get a building that is still livable, has a high quality of life, but maybe won't cost 2x. And the government is actually pushing for this, right? So they're interested in it as well. Another big one for me is, can we deliver radical efficiency and better livability for lower or equivalent costs? One of the reasons I'm really excited about working at the Seattle social housing developer is I think this is our opportunity to kind of deliver that exact model. We'll see if we're successful. How can we just expedite better models, right? Prefabrication, modular, these have significant issues on either end. I have a friend who just completed a modular product or a modular housing product on the West Coast. They got a lot of rain in California. The mold mediation is going to be a big issue with this because they didn't cover it properly. Cabinets don't work, all of the OSB warped. Doors don't open and close, right? So just because we're doing different ways of developing projects doesn't mean we're expediting them or making them better. And then just research on understanding urban morphology. We were talking earlier today about like how to think about urban planning in the context of a school that doesn't have one. You guys do have a landscape department. You're working on ecology. So I think that there are definitely opportunities for that. And then so we can start to think about what are the effects of rezoning in some instances, constantly rezoning the same areas because that's where we limit multifamily or commercial to, right? How does that affect housing typologies? What will be allowed to ensue from that? So I'll leave you with this, The Shining. I can't walk into a building in the US and not think of this movie, but I think this fundamental aspect, right? How our building codes affect our quality of life is really, really critical. And I think we need to mitigate that or at least address it. And so that is all.
Time for some questions, if there are questions.
Thanks, Mike. So we as a community, State College is currently in the process of a rezoning or upzoning measure. Candidly, we are 7, 8 years into that process with no real sort of like finish or any sort of like deliverable. You do have electeds in the room. You have current and former electeds. We have people who are not necessarily elected, but are actively working to try to upzone an area which is largely built out without a lot of buildable space and places that need to be redeveloped. And as a result, we have a lot of housing that is, they're substandard or poor condition. What are the, 1, 2, 3 things that we should be focusing on to try to really convince people and get to the finish line on rezoning?
Wow. Thank you, Blake, for dropping the toughest question on the first one. Not knowing much about the context of State College, I will say that the first one is just expand where housing can go, right? So this is an issue that we see a lot in Seattle. In the 90s, we decided that we should let the people determine where housing should go. And in exchange for upzones, they got to limit where it went. And the city's development since the 90s has always been, we funnel all of it here. Every 10 years, we'll rezone. And so you get new buildings that are like a couple floors taller than buildings from the previous rezone. So there's a lot of disjointed aspects to the way that we're developing. You go to other countries and they distribute that zoning much more broadly. So I would say the first one is it shouldn't be isolated to smaller areas. I joke about the hose of zoning, right? If you hold it really, really, really tight, the hose, so the water comes out really, really fast. I think it's the same way with development. If you restrict where that development can go to an almost ridiculously small amount, land prices are going to go up, and then it makes the feasibility of development even more complicated in those areas. So I think distributing it more broadly is really important. The second one is single stair. Again, this goes back to how we do that piecemeal development. Maybe there are 1 or 2 story buildings there, but if you were allowed to do a 4 or 5 story single stair building, right, you can get more density, but it's kind of within that same gentle framework that already exists. The third one, I have no idea. I would say it's probably related to like expediting permitting processes. So in Seattle, it's basically a year and a half to design a building and then a year and a half to build it. And so from the development standpoint, you've got this 3-year timeline to finish the project, but you don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. You don't know that you're going to have 100% tariff on Canadian lumber that don't make your numbers work or some other thing related to that. So those timelines become much more difficult. So anything to kind of reduce those timelines, I think, is also critical.
Other questions? Yeah, I'll come to you.
Michael Black. So I've watched this zoning process happen for 35 years. They haven't rezoned in this area for 67 years. So one of those reasons is just analysis paralysis. You've got a lot of very smart people in town, and some people think they're the smartest people in the room, and they're stuck. The other part is we have the economy of building. So there's a money grab for a lot of people, and then there's the cost of building in certain areas. Can you address ways in which we can talk about the economy and these are nice reaches? They're not fiscally responsible for some of the developers. How do we get there?
I mean, I would say the first one is you have the Cocoziello Research Institute, Real Estate Innovation Institute that you can lean into. That's a really good question. The economics, I had a colleague at the Urban Land Institute in the Pacific Northwest who's like nothing pencils in the Pacific Northwest right now for a number of reasons: interest rates, tariffs, labor costs, whatever. Fundamentally, like the economics of development in the US just don't make sense. I don't know how that's going to change. I think long term, we need to find ways to expedite that somehow. I also think we need more community builders. I'm a big believer in co-housing, enabling like homeowners to develop their own properties as well. We don't have the ability to do small buildings in the US. Like a building code, financing, everything makes it incredibly difficult. And I think that we need to take this step back and figure out, like, the average building, the average home, residential building in Germany is a fourplex. And it's been a fourplex since before World War II. So it's not some post-war thing. Like before the war, after the war, the fourplex was the predominant form of housing in the entire country. And there's a reason, right? The economics of that development has never really been restricted. They find ways to like innovate and kind of incentivize it. Their zoning codes don't prevent it. Like if we take a step back in the US, there have been a number of instances that have, the 2008 recession wiped out a bunch of small developers, small builders. And a lot of places, like even in Seattle, trying to get developers to build 6-story buildings. We had this huge, even if the economics worked out, like finding labor for that was really, really difficult. I think we need to find, I don't know, it's the economics, it's the labor, it's the building codes, there's like 100 different things. And I don't know if there's any one string you could pull to make it work. I think it's gonna take a significant effort, like the Cocoziello Institute, to get there.
Yeah, I guess my question ties into that. So my name's Sandra Staub, and I'm an architecture professor here, and I have spent about half my life in Germany, so I'm familiar with a lot of the topics that you discussed here. You mentioned that developers in the US tend to develop on a large scale. So you have, not individual parcels that are developed, but someone buys up a bunch of parcels, puts a package together, puts up something big. And that seems to be the customary model, whereas you say in many European countries, it's very different. Things are developed in a smaller scale, and there's the Baugruppen concept, which is building groups where people basically take the building process into their own hands. My question is, because you've studied this a lot, and you've done a great analysis of the difference between the two continents, let's say, and some of the problems that we have in the US, but what would it take to start producing some of these more livable apartments, housing units in the US? What do you think would need to change? And what would those first steps be?
Getting all the easy questions.
Okay, so we moved to Germany in 2019 because I wanted to live in a Bau group, and I knew after trying to build one in Seattle for 5 years, I knew wasn't going to happen. The problem is banks aren't going to lend to a group of people who want to come together and build their own multifamily housing unless there's like a real estate development person on their team, right? Like from a fiscal standpoint, I get that. In Germany, they've moved beyond that, and that's the one thing that I really wish I understood a little bit better. But I think it's one is the economics of construction are not really ideal for it. So we're again in the process of trying to figure out how to develop a Baugruppe in Seattle. We think we get the numbers to work. We've got development people on board who are going to assist us in the project. But even then, like there's so much risk that it's really the banks don't want to give us money, and we're all like decently middle class people, right? It's like we can afford a mortgage on a home. We're just going to bundle all our mortgages together and build a nicer home. It's not that complicated. I think another one is regulation. So like the single stair thing, right? Like in Seattle, we've allowed 6-story single stair since 1977. It's only in the last few years that people are really leaning into it. And it's because these larger buildings where people couldn't assemble all of the land and like you had like this little leftover land, that's what's being redeveloped as kind of rents go up to accommodate the construction. So I think that regulation definitely plays a role. Like we're allowed to do it. And also like people know about it now because I've been screaming about it for 8 or 9 years. And so like we're seeing a lot more through that. So I guess regulation would be the other one. I don't really know. I think the process of getting community to build their own housing is really important. How you get there, I mean, I've been trying to figure this out for 10 years. I'm sure you've been trying to figure it out for a while too. It's just way too complicated, right? It's like I said, you have to be a lawyer to put together a building these days, and it just, it doesn't make any sense.
So I know that in Germany, one advantage is that you need 2 forms of egress. The stairwell, that central stairwell in a building is one, and then the second is the ladder, the fire department's ladder up, which is one reason why you need those windows, because you cannot have a bedroom without a window. You can't escape it in case of a fire.
Back to our own area. We do have an affordability issue here, and there's competing interests. Like there's a high market for housing students, and there's also a strong desire for second homes in our community. We also have a borough with multiple townships surrounding it, which they all compete. And my understanding, even out in the furthest townships, neighborhoods aren't neighborhoods. They're empty houses with an occasional family living in them. But as a community, we also have a tract of land. I don't know how it's going to go. It's going to be a big tract of land out on Rockview Prison. It's state-owned land right now. My question is, do you suggest going into old neighborhoods to try and reconstruct for your affordable housing? Would you try to find tracts of land like out at Rockview, which is a fairly large tract, it's farm fields, to try and do what you're talking about? And I forget what you call it, the individual stairwells with the units. Yeah. That's a wonderful idea. I'm involved in lighting, getting more light in. There was a recent study I heard about that was conducted in London because I wanted equal economic people. They did it by drugstores because they had neighborhood drugstores. There were more drugs purchased in neighborhoods where there weren't parks, where there was parks. There's a real connection to people, having the green space, seeing the natural daylight and the trees. So I'm not sure I have a question other than whether redeveloping what's already built out in our small borough. Now the townships may have more land, but then there's a whole big tract of land that may be becoming available as they close down Rockview Prison.
I think it's a little bit of both. If you close down the possibility for development in the kind of, let's say, existing neighborhoods, there's still going to be those pressures. The second homes, the people who are coming in with higher incomes, the need for students to be housed, right? That demand is still going to push up. So you do need to find a way to allow some incremental development, I guess, in those neighborhoods. But at the same time, like there's no reason that Rockville, is it Rockville? Rockview, right? Couldn't be something like that, right? Where you have parks, like it's a community within a community. This is connected by train, but maybe it's connected by bus. I don't know how far away it is or whatever, but like this idea that you can build places that have kind of all of the things you need for most of your daily life. Grocery stores, this has several kindergartens, schools, there's churches here, library, right? So like you don't need to leave the neighborhood to go and do these things that you need to do on a daily basis. We're really not geared up well to incorporate all of these things. And this goes back to like our lack of comprehensive urban planning and a bunch of other issues. But like in my mind, there's no reason that you couldn't do some iteration of this for part of it.
This might be the last question, which is why I'm not going to ask you the last thing.
Hi, you mentioned like financing as a major barrier. So is there anything in your experience that municipal governments can do to incentivize local banks to finance some of these smaller cooperative projects? Understanding that, of course, you're from the West Coast and, you know, there might be some state preemption here in Pennsylvania, but yeah, is there any levers that municipal government officials can pull there?
I would say your municipal electeds should champion these things at the state level. So like North Dakota has a development bank, and that development bank funds a bunch of really cool stuff. We're talking about it in Washington, D.C. The third largest bank in Germany is the KfW, which is actually a development bank founded by the U.S. with Germany for the Marshall Plan after World War II. And that's like, they provide a lot of the funding for energy efficiency retrofits, and co-ops and Baugruppen and other fun stuff like that. I think having like a development bank would be really, really good. I guess the other thing would be that like your electeds have a really good relationship with local lenders and like try to spearhead a way around this. The city of Hamburg in Germany has the Department of Co-housing, let's just call it that. It's a department within the city. They connect people who are looking for lands with people who have lands. They connect financing with projects. They connect architects and builders with groups that are interested in doing it. They hold like symposia to like the public, because like the public, you know, this goes back to we don't have the models to show people a different way as possible, right? Like they kind of take on that role as like educator of the population, which is kind of self-referential, because then you have a bunch of people living in these kinds of buildings that other people actually want to live in, and then they know it's like feasible, and then they can kind of, okay, we're going to start our own group, right? And so it, you know, kind of reinforces that way.
I hate to cut off the conversation, but we're at time. So please join me in thanking Michael Eliason again for being here. Stay tuned for the rest of the seminar series. We have a seminar coming up in February, March, and April. So make sure you're on our listserv. It's cocoziello@psu.edu if you want to join that. And thank you so much.